Hello, thank you for joining us on hashtag No Limits. I'm your host, Shelly Kino. Hashtag No Limits is about people who society has placed limits upon, but who have busted through those limits. Ophelia says in Hamlet, we know what we are, but not what we may be. And I believe that there is no better example of that than the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. Who in their right mind would ever look at a caterpillar and think, oh, this crawling thing is suddenly going to be flying and soaring in the skies? And I 100% believe in what Ophelia says. I have seen it as an education consultant, and I have certainly seen it as a former special education teacher, that some of my former students have had limits placed upon them of they won't read, you're wasting your time trying to teach them to read, or they're never going to go to college and now they're graduating from college. And so it's not a physical limit, it's a mindset. And it's a mindset that I'm trying to change and give people a different perspective. And my guest today, Orenza Jaske, has a great story to tell, not only of her personal life, but in her professional life, that she is helping people bust through those limits. So Orenza, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Good, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about you and your professional and your personal life, kind of what I was talking about.
Sure. Well, been around for a while. So I started as a way back in the day. I was a child welfare worker, so I worked with kids in the foster care system, and then I got my master's degree, and I am a LCPC. So I predominantly work with kids and adolescents and their families, with behavior issues and mental health conditions. Also worked with kids in the autism spectrum, ones that were verbal and don't have high support needs. And so I've gone from like a therapeutic day school. I've worked in private practice. I worked in a group practice. I've worked in a community mental health agency. So I've kind of been in all kinds of different environments, working with kids and adolescents and their families. My husband and I got married, and we went through the adoption process, and that took us about 3 years. So all that time I was working in different places, working with kids and adolescents. And so finally, we waited 3 years because, they try to match you up with the right parents. We had to make a little book about ourselves and, what we did for a living, what we like to do. And then the parents could go through these books and try and find, a match, like a couple that they thought would be good for their child. Mm-hmm. And so basically we, the parents that picked us were, the dad was actually on the spectrum, and that was part of the reason they picked us, because of my work with kids with autism. And on the off chance that maybe our daughter would have autism, because the dad had autism himself, and so we adopted her. And sorry, I keep looking up here. And
That's okay.
Her, and then around 18 months, she had some sensory issues that I could tell early on. And this is what else the other thing is, like, the pediatrician kept going, oh, well, it could be whatever, or just some things. She kept kind of brushing me off, thinking like, oh, well, maybe I was reading too much into it, or being too overprotective. And around 18 months, my daughter had some words, but around 18 months, she just stopped talking altogether. And even then, the pediatrician was like, oh, let's give it a couple weeks. It could be some other reason why she's not talking at the moment. And I was kind of like, okay, there's something wrong. And so I said to my brother, because my nephew is also on the spectrum. And he's like, you should call early intervention. And so there's actually my brother, his family, they go to the same pediatric practice. And there's another doctor there who actually has a special interest with kids with developmental disabilities. So he actually told me to go to her. And she's actually awesome. She's been seeing my daughter ever since then. The other person is still at the practice, and occasionally if she's sick or something, we have to see her, but we don't really see her anymore, because after we had her evaluated, we saw her for something. And I was like, oh, so they think she has autism. I'm like, no, she does have autism. It was very weird. But the other doctor, that we love her, and she's really good with my daughter. My daughter likes to run around the room, and she's just so awesome. She doesn't skip a beat. Like, she'll check her ear while she's climbing on something. It's just awesome. She's really good with her, and so you could tell it's so different than the other pediatricians in the office. You could tell that's like her specialty,
Mhm.
and she's still pretty much nonverbal. I mean, this was when she was 2, she got diagnosed. I found this awesome study at Northwestern, and it was for kids that you either thought had been diagnosed with autism, or that you thought maybe were. So like they got her evaluated through there. Otherwise, I was going to have to wait forever. It was like I got in there within 3 weeks. They diagnosed her. We saw a pediatric developmental pediatrician. I can never remember. I can never say that right. And
That's
she got
okay.
diagnosed in 3 weeks, and we got her in the study. And the speech
Wow.
therapist through there is awesome. And my daughter was gesturing, and everything was more meaningful. Her joy and attention was better with this study. It was just really, really good. And so unfortunately that study only lasted 6 months. So I'm like, hey, you made this study like a year. Like that therapist was like, I did a lot of my internships at places that used floor time. So I think because it was similar to they were like going through the study and trying, it was more another DIR model, which is what floor time is. And she's like, I think, you find a place that has floor time, which is, on the same genre of therapy. She's like, I think she'd do really well with that. So I found a place near our house that, a lot of the therapists were certified in floor time, or at least practice floor time. And she's been there since just before she turned 3. And same therapist, thank God. I always tell her she can't ever leave. but, you, but you can never leave, because my daughter is does so well with her, and she will try to say words. It's like she's still not really verbal, but she'll say dada now and mama and go and some other stuff like that. She mostly uses her AAC device now, which she does really well with. And her therapist even said she uses it better than some of the older kids she works with. So
It's awesome.
yeah, so she did really well with that. And she's she's doing really well. We still go to OT. And she has OT and speech through school, as well as the AAC devices through school. She got it when she was 3.5. And I'm trying to think what else is going on with her. She's doing really well. I mean, she obviously has her challenges, being nonverbal and autistic. And
So
that's
how old
about
is
it.
she now?
She just turned 7. She's in first
Okay.
grade. So I'm trying to think. But that's a little bit about me, a little bit about her, and where we're at right now.
So for anyone who is watching, I know what you're referring to when you say AAC, but could you explain what that is a little bit more and tell how she uses hers?
So basically, okay, show it to you, but she has it at school. Basically, what they have at school is like, it's like, well, they have it on iPad, it could be any kind of device, and they have an app on there that just has a bunch of like pictures, little icons and pictures with words on it. And so like, when she first started, there was only 16 like icons or pictures on the screen because she was little, and they did a test to see if she could identify, like there was like a balloon, and she had to find a balloon in an array of like other pictures, and so she could spot it in a field of 16. Last year, they decided, since it was taking, she was forming like more like 3 and 4 word utterances, and it was taking her so long to flip through those screens to find the words to utterances, that they decided they were going to make it bigger. And the speech therapist at the school thought, okay, maybe we'll do like 50 on the page, see how she does with that. But then the tech person at the school said, well, we don't want to like give her 50, and then when she's a little bit older, we'll do it again because of motor planning required with it. So they actually 90 per page, which I was overwhelmed with. I'm still learning.
Wow.
And it's so small too, and I'm like trying to like look at it. I'm not wearing my glasses now, but I'm like, where is that? So, but she's like doing really well with it. I mean, unfortunately, COVID put a kibosh on it for a little while, because like right when they changed it, the school closed like the next week.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a little rough. But when she got back to the school in person in the fall, she picked up on it right away. And because they had it so she could flip between the 2 page sets, if like she couldn't find something, she'd go back to the page set. It was easier for her. But like by like November, I think they just got rid of the old page set altogether. So yeah, so she got the hang of it right away. It was a little bit harder for mom though. It's just
yeah. So can you speak to kind of maybe the process of if you had to go through any sort of major hoops or anything in order for her to qualify to use the AAC device?
Yeah. So starting back when she went to preschool in the early childhood program in our school district. So she went from early intervention, which is, community-based or home-based, where the therapist would come to your house and, you guys would do. And so I did not have a good experience with those speech therapists. We don't have to get into all that. That's why I found the study. And then at the very last minute, the speech therapist we had, I tried to do like pecs or make up her own thing, and my daughter just wasn't getting it. And so then when we started at school, they would what they use there for their like low tech or picture thing that they do. It's like a legal size folder with like pictures that are the most common. Like they did the most common of 50 pictures that they use, and then they could add more later. I think they have like 300 symbols after the 50 or however they do it there. And my daughter wasn't getting it. There was just too many pictures for her to focus on. And obviously when they did the test later, she could only find a picture within 16. Well, that's what she couldn't find. They were looking at. It'd be easier, right. Like, okay, what do you want for a snack? And they would like pick two things. Do you want goldfish or do you want whatever the other snack was? She'd be able to pick that because there's only two pictures. But
sure.
For like the longest time, I was arguing with the speech therapist at the school, nice lady, but she's just like, oh, everybody gets it. I'm like, I can't even figure out what's going on in this thing. There's only 50 pictures. But you know what I mean? I'm like, how do you take my kid to see this? There's like too much going on there, and she does pay attention to the detail, but like it was just she wasn't looking at anything. And so thankfully, our private speech therapist works in a neighboring school district, and they do use a similar system, but theirs is only 30 pictures. And what they do is they usually like start with 8 and they block out the other ones. I mean, they keep the 8 in the space where they are, when the 30 are there. But she was like trying to, and I must have told her, it was a long process because I have nothing against the speech therapist. She's really knowledgeable. But she kept telling me, I've been here 17 years. And I'm like, okay, you don't know my kid, though. Like, I'm trying to explain to you this is too much for my kid. Right. And so that speech therapist, I think, finally she called and talked to her. And I must have told the school speech therapist that our private speech therapist worked in the neighboring school district. But apparently she didn't hear me, even though I must have told her at least 3 times before she actually talked to her. So then she's like, oh, I talked to Brittany. I didn't know she worked at blah, blah, blah school district. I'm like, yeah, I must have told you 3 times. But because you talked to Brittany and Brittany told you, then okay. So then she tended to take Brittany's word for it on stuff. So surprisingly, Brittany kept pushing the AAC device and she got it at 3.5. Most other kids would not get it that early. And thankfully she did, because that was the only mode that she really picked up on. She didn't pick up on the text or the pictures. Like I said, if they said, oh, do you want blah, 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 she could pick from 2 things, but it was just too hard for her to do. And she never picked up on the sign language. It was just too hard for her. So thankfully she got it at 3.5 because that was her best way to communicate, her best way to and she picked up on it really fast. And they were so surprised that she picked up on it. I'm like, well, that's what I kept telling you. Like, I'm just like, sometimes I feel like they think they know what's best and they don't want to listen to parents. So it's like, I know my kid better than you do. I've been living with her for the last 3 years. Like, you know what I mean? Or the last however long, know. So, I mean, it's not like they don't know stuff. Like when I was like kind of iffy on the 90, but then like, I guess I should have thought about it, the 90 symbols versus the 50. But, my kid, that's her mode, and she figured it out way faster than me when they switched it to the higher page set.
I want to stop you because you've said a couple of things I want to make sure to really key in on, and I don't want to forget them. And the first is you are the expert in your child, and I don't mean just you, but I mean every parent out there, yes. Any parent who is watching right now.
Yes.
You will go sit at a table for an IEP meeting, and everyone around the table, including you, is an expert. They are experts in content and subject and practices. You are an expert in your child. And I want you to stand up and claim that. I don't necessarily mean physically stand up, but but
seriously, yes. You would. Whoever is listening to this, don't let people talk you out of stuff. Don't for the longest time, I knew something was up with my daughter before she stopped talking, and everybody kept telling me, calm down. You're just reading things into things, just because her birth father is on the spectrum. I was like, after she stopped talking, I was like, I should have done something sooner, because I knew she had sensory issues, way early on, and I could at least had her go to OT or something before, before that started. And so I tell people all the time, if you know something's wrong, you're the parent, you know better than any doctor, any whoever. So even then, I let the pediatrician make like I didn't know what I was talking about, so.
Yeah. And the other thing that you mentioned, so definitely, in Orenza's experience, it had to be her voice. And in her specific experience, it really did have to be Orenza's voice because her daughter is nonverbal. But even in a sense where your child is verbal and can express their wants and needs and desires to you, you are still their voice when you go to these IEP meetings. And so I want you to really hold on to the fact that you are an expert and don't back down. Do it in a respectful way, of course, but
Definitely.
when they say, well, we're the experts, yes, you are. And I acknowledge your expertise in whatever it is, but I am an expert in my child and I would like to be acknowledged for that as well. And then the next thing that you said that I wanted to really key in on is it wasn't an easy process from going from PECS pictures, which I don't know exactly what PECS, the letters stand for anymore. I don't remember. I did when I worked in teaching every day, but it's basically like little, almost stick figures, unless they've upgraded them, and they're pretty generic, and all the foods and the pictures are generic so that they can cover as many people as possible. But yeah, it is just you touch this picture, you touch this picture. I used to have students early on in my career that would carry a PECS book, and they would be taught like this color is for food and this color of pictures. And so they would have them sectioned off. But it wasn't an easy process for you to convince the school, in essence, that, the PECS pictures and even the homemade pictures, which I've done those as well, to be more realistic and have the child in the picture holding the book or holding the food or whatever it was. So keep asking. And the data is so, so important. One of the things that I didn't mention about Orenza at the beginning is she is also a fellow master IEP coach with me. And, our mentor, Catherine Witcher, very rightly so, is always pointing out the fact that data is what drives the goals. It's what drives the present levels in an IEP. It's what drives accommodations. It's what drives the services. It's what drives least restrictive environment. And so make sure that you have all of this material written down, like, okay, she's tried these picture programs for X number of weeks or months, and, she's not being successful. So now let's try something else. And also, and maybe you've heard this, and maybe you heard this while you were trying to get this for your daughter. I've heard people say, well, because she has some verbalizations, we don't want to give her a PECS or an augmentative device because then she won't develop her speech.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of parents. And then I know some parents who don't even use the device at home because they want their child to speak. And that's like the exact opposite of what the AAC device or the pictures do. Because I know my daughter, when she can't figure out what she wants to say or she's super frustrated, it's so much harder for her. It actually helps them to relax, and then with the ability to communicate, they're more likely to, if they will eventually at some point start speaking, it'll help them to be able to, and it reinforces the word in their head as well. Speech therapist explained a little bit better to me, and I'm probably like to look doing that, but yeah, she is now, well, especially with the speech therapist she's had since she was almost 3. She's more willing. She tries to speak. She will, if the therapist says something to her, she'll repeat it back, or, and it's a lot easier with her with the private speech therapist than at school. They push the device more at school, which is fine. I mean, she needs to be able to communicate, but when we're in private speech, she's so much more comfortable with her, because sometimes speech therapists change from year to year too. And even though the therapist she has this year I really like at school, I know for a fact she's not going to have her next year because she's moving. They're splitting up the program, and that therapist is going to the other school. So I know she won't have her next year, which I'm kind of sad about because I really like her. But
yeah, it's so unfortunate. And like what you said about the oh, now shoot, I can't remember who you said that you're like, I really love you. You can't ever quit. You always have to, was that the OT or this?
That's their private therapist. Yeah. I'm like,
private therapist. Yeah.
It
is when you get that really good person that makes that connection, like, no, don't leave. Now we got to start over.
No. And that happened with her OT that we had at the private OT we were seeing. She started seeing her at like 2.5 because developmental pediatricians thought it would be good for her to like go to a clinic and like, because they do stuff at home. There's only so much you could do with OT at home unless you have like a swing and stuff that you can hang in the house. Most people don't. And so we started at 2.5, and that therapist, I don't know, about a year and a half ago, I think now, I don't even remember, not 2 years ago, decided that she wanted to go full-time into school because she wanted to be able to see her kids. And I totally understand, working as a therapist myself, you usually work at night and weekends because your clients are available. And so then the girl we had after her was really nice, and then she quit, and another therapist we had after that quit. And so then actually the owner asked our old therapist to come back just to see my child, her child, the owner's child, in therapy, and another kid. And so she came back, and because then we go to 2 different clinics to go speech and OT because the speech therapist we went in was, floor time. So, so we went to a separate clinic for that. But she said, I'm like, yeah, we'll stay for her. If Jenny's coming back, yeah, we'll stay. Because we were thinking of going to one clinic because, we were splitting because I really like Jenny. And that's why we didn't leave. But I'm like, yeah, Jenny's coming back. Yeah, we'll stay. So she.
It really does make a difference when you have that connection, and there's that understanding and that willingness to hear what you as the parent bring to the table and to be able to embrace different ways of potentially getting the same result. As you talked about the speech therapist wanting to stick with those. I tried to say pathologist and therapist and got a therapist. But yeah, wanting to stick with the pictures versus going to the communication device. The end result is the same. There's communication. And I think you mentioned that your daughter does her communication device through her iPad.
Yeah, that's with a bunch of iPads. They based on your child's needs. So the tech person evaluates. There's a bunch of tests. I don't know on the whole process, but does a bunch of tests. I know they were like having her look for the balloon and different like sets of pictures, and then that person, based on all her tests, will pick a program that goes on that iPad. So I don't know. Don't ask me what the name of the program she has. It's like Snap plus or first or something. It's some very weird long name, and we got an email saying the name's going to change and the icon's going to look different.
Oh.
Like this changeover comes in June, but nothing's going to change. Like the actual program's going to be the same. I'm like, why change it? I mean, it is a long, clunky name. I don't know why they named it that in the first place. But she had picked it specifically because my daughter's very visual, and if you push the icon, it lights up and like all this stuff. And that was the whole reason she picked it. But this whole big long explanation. I mean, I like our tech person, the head of the tech department. She's super nice, and she's like, I did all these tests. She was very meticulous about what she did. And she's like, I picked this program specifically for Izzy because of blah 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, that's so nice. Like, now the tech department's bigger, and there's another girl that works with her who tech is in charge, like oversees our school. So, but she's also really nice too. She came to the meeting, like our IP meeting, and she had this like whole thing about how Izzy's doing, and she observed her and blah blah blah. I'm like, oh, that's so nice. I love her tech department. It's just great. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So
yeah, and I know that there are other devices besides the iPad, and things have probably progressed even more since I was full-time teaching. I had a student who had what was called Dynavox, and it was a whole separate unit.
And actually, the company Dynavox makes this app. I think it's like something Dynavox. They actually make this app. It's one of their programs. So I don't know if now you can put all their stuff on an iPad. I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't, like I said, I haven't worked directly with anyone who's used an AAC in a while, but that was, 7 or 8 or 9 years ago, maybe more than that, years ago now. And it was amazing once we were finally able to get the child understanding. And the particular student that I worked with at the time had some involuntary muscle movements. And so a lot of times it was difficult to get the hand to come up and touch the different buttons. So we worked and we found a switch that he was able to access his device with his elbow, and he had more control going that way. And so I want to encourage anyone who has a child that is not speaking, that there's lots of ways to communicate. And so I don't want you to think that because your child isn't speaking today, that they A, will never speak, or B, cannot communicate with you. There are so many different ways of communicating. And I also want to encourage any parents who have a child at school that is using a communication device to also use that device at home, because you inadvertently are limiting your child's communication skills. Because as Orenza said, for her daughter, it's a much more relaxing environment for her to say what she needs to say. And, if you think about yourself, and if you wanted to try to say something and you couldn't speak it using either your mouth or some sort of device, how frustrating that would be to you, even though maybe the person that you're speaking to or communicating with thinks they're understanding you. What if you're wrong? Or what if if you're giving them options? Because I know a lot of parents will do similar to what you mentioned before, like, well, do you want this snack or this snack? Well, what if there's a third or a fourth choice that the child really wants? And if you're not using that communication device or that other mode of communication, they're not really getting exactly what they want. And so always broadening those horizons and always allowing them to use the mode that they're most comfortable with. And also that helps them for when they're not with you to be able to communicate to other people too. And we want that as well. Yeah. So,
that's helpful too. Cause we haven't been to church in a long time because of the whole COVID thing, but, where we're going to church, they have a special needs ministry, like one's for adults and one's for kids and teen. And it just so happened one day we were there and there was a speech therapist there, and she was volunteering, and they put my daughter with her, because my daughter, whole other thing, she puts things that she's not supposed to put in her mouth, and eats like non-edibles. So that's a whole separate thing. But, so they put her, and she needs a one-on-one, because you can't leave her alone for very long, because she'll put stuff in her mouth. But then when we came back, so we left her with her device, and so when we came back, the speech therapist was like, "Oh my goodness, she knows all her colors. She knows this. She so and we could have probably left with somebody who wasn't a speech therapist, got to really get some of her thoughts out, right?" So, it does help. The only one who doesn't really want to deal with it is my mom, who, is in her 70s and doesn't understand anything technological. And I'm like, she can actually just use it and tell you what she wants, kind of thing. Right. I was like, we have our own mode of communication. I'm like, okay, Mom.
Yeah. And sometimes, you have that sort of situation, but how awesome was that even, like you said, if it wasn't a speech therapist that was in the daycare setting, sadly, we have this wrong thought of, if someone can't communicate, they don't understand. And so to be able to
underestimate my daughter.
Right. And so to be able to prove that she knew all of her colors and any other question that this woman asked her, she had her device to be able to do that. And especially because she has a field of a lot of different choices, again, that proves that it wasn't just a fluke, as a lot of people will often think too, of, oh, well, it was just, an accident that they chose the color that I wanted, or they chose the word that I wanted, or, whatever it is. And so, being able to express, just think about it, if you couldn't express yourself because somebody took your speech away, how would you feel? That's your voice. The communication device for a lot of people is their voice. So use it as often as you can. And their natural speech will also develop at the same time. So if they are ever going to speak, or they are ever going to express themselves differently than what they're currently doing, the communication device is really helping that, not hindering it. So tell us a little bit about some of, what else do you want to tell us about your daughter? I don't want to, because as I told you, this is your story, and I want your story to be told your way. So what else would you like to tell us about your family and your daughter, and any limits that she's busted through that had been placed upon her?
Well, I mean, my daughter's, she's really smart. And like I said, people really underestimate her. I mean, she's in first grade and, she is delayed. I'm not going to be like, oh, she's like, but she's super smart. I mean, she's doing simple addition and subtraction and, what else is she doing? She's learning sight words and, trying to think what else? Those are her goals right now. But, she's not a fan of handwriting though. I can tell you that much. But she's really smart. Like to explain to you, I always say she's like, she has this engineering mind. She's always trying to figure out how things work. And I mean, I even noticed that as early as like 6 months old. Like I was holding her one time and she was like 6 months old and I had the the water faucet on. She was like looking like this to see like how the water was coming out of there. And it was just, so I feel like, and then people really do underestimate her. And I always say this to, especially my mother, I don't have to keep bringing her up, but she understands pretty much everything you say. So like, people, and she does not like to be talked about in front of her. So I'm like, she totally understands. And, and the funniest thing, like, we talk about like, my husband and I sometimes, because we always have to be with her. One of us has to be with her. So anytime we want to talk about anything that's like not related to her, she's like not happy about that. Why are we talking about this? And so a few times, not always, but a few times, one time she like was on her device. She just like stopped. She like hit stop. Like, is this not interesting to you? So I mean, that's something we can talk about, like, whatever, you had a pipe leaking in the garage and you had to call the homeowner warranty or whatever we have. And so he's like, sometimes my husband does drone on with details that I don't even really want to know about, but so then she's just like, who cares about the pipe? Let's go play outside or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
So, I mean, she's super active, she's like, always got a bunch of energy. We moved to our current house because like there's a park literally in the backyard. And then there's like parks either direction. You walk out the front door, or you can go to the left or right. There's a park. And part of the reason why we moved here, she like loves to climb and run and swing. And she's a sensory seeker for sure.
So what were some of the things you said you had noticed, before age 18 months when her speech regressed, some of her sensory needs? What were some of the things that you saw that maybe a parent is seeing?
Yeah. So like if we were anywhere, there was a lot of people, she would like, kind of like, I don't even cry or like put her head down or like, if we were trying to think one time. Okay, so kids don't wear shoes obviously until they walk, but they got baby shoes. So one time I thought, oh, look at these cute little flip flops. So I put it on her and she started screaming. And so I took it off. But she continued. Okay, I took it off the minute she started screaming. So she screamed for like an hour after that I took it off. And so I said something to the pediatrician at the time that we were seeing, and she's just like, oh well, she's just my favorite. She's just strong-willed. I'm like, okay, yes, she is strong-willed. This is something else. This is not being strong. So stuff like that, like and there are certain clothes she to this day those clothes she doesn't like. So like she doesn't. And babies only blankets, but she'll always sleep with her pillow on her face, like even as when we could put a pillow in the crib, and she never slept in the crib. She always slept with us, and no, that's a no. But she always wanted to be with us, and she had like issues when she was a baby, like colic and just like reflux and stomach issues, and I know those are not they're not specific to autism, but this is all stuff that like her dad had. And I'm not saying that means she was going to be autistic with the sensory issues. And it was always something. And the pediatrician's like, yeah, no, I don't, she kept like, oh, it's fine. I'm like, oh, it's not fine. It's like, something's going on, And then we were like, we went to the GI doctor, we went to the neurologist, we went to the cardiologist with that, like one of them, that there was like an innocent murmur or something. It went away on its own, but there's always something. And I'm not saying these are all associated with autism, but I'm like, something else is going on here. The sensory issues for sure. And I have a couple of friends who are OTs. I mean, I know more OTs now because of my daughter, but my one friend was like, it's never too early to get an evaluation. She's like, don't let people stop you. But of course I listened to everybody else, not my friend who's the OT. And, because maybe, first time mom, you're overprotective.
Right.
Spectrum, you're just into things. And, and then of course, oh, you're a therapist, you see kids who are abnormal. So yeah, you're just seeing things that aren't there. And I'm like, so of course I let everybody else talk me out of that. And then when she stopped talking, I'm like, yeah, that's it. This is not okay. This is not normal. Kids don't start talking and stop talking. And I do know neurotypical kids do regress, but this is not a typical thing that neurotypical kids go through. It's more of a sign of lack of speech, or regression of speech is definitely a sign of autism. And then by the time we actually went to see the developmental pediatrician, there's a lot of other things. And I can't even think of it. She was clapping, she stopped clapping. She was pointing, she stopped pointing. Like, that's all autism.
Yeah.
And so, and whatever that I did those self questionnaires online.
Uh-huh.
Everything was autism. And so then when, as soon as, we did the evaluation, it was like this 3-hour thing at Northwestern. And the developmental pediatrician was like, well, autism. I'm like, yeah, I already know. You know what I mean? It was like,
yeah, you weren't surprised. Well, yeah, you had a lot of experience with autism and people, at different stages of their life with autism. And so you had seen a lot compared to the average person. And so again, for anybody who's watching, and if you are watching, let us know, that you're here with us, or, if you're watching it in the replay, let us know with the hashtag replay. And before I forget, because I almost always forget this sort of housekeeping thing, definitely subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube. Hit the like button on Facebook and then the little bell so you get the notifications when I go live, and so you don't miss any of these. I always forget to do that kind of stuff. So I just I'm kind of like a squirrel. It's like, oh, okay, it's on my mind. I better say it right now. But again, what I'm encouraging is you to keep fighting and, trust your gut and be that parent. I so often hear, I don't want to be that parent. Well, you need to be that parent. Be that parent and be wrong. Or be that parent.
Yeah, right. I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen? Your kid doesn't have autism, or this is just a regular, or it could just be a developmental delay, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? I mean, but at least you feel better about it. You know what I mean? You trust your gut and go. But I swear, 9 times out of 10, your gut is right. Let's just say
that. It is. I mean, a mother's knowledge and intuition, some people will poo-poo that, but I really do think, and it goes back to what we said earlier, that you are the expert in your child. You are with them every day. You are with them every minute of every day in a lot of instances. And you have studied them. They have been your degree program for however long you've had the child. So
I would say that the parents, when I was working full time, I would say as parents all the time, I see your kid 1 hour a week. You're with them 24 hours a day. You know them better than I do. I mean, I would know them, but they would, so I would always encourage parents, like even when I was a professional, I would try at least to make them feel like they were a part of the team, because they were. I mean, I get my information from them, them. So that was so funny though, because it is tiring being the parent of an autistic child. So I, kudos to all the parents I was working with. it's tiring. It is.
You have a new appreciation in the last 7 years than you did before.
No, I love my daughter, and I love working with kids on the spectrum.
Absolutely.
They have I love them because they're honest. It's just funny. It's like they're honest, and they just have this way of, most of them anyway, have this way of, I don't know, so it's unique sense of humor, and they were just really honest, and tell me how you really feel.
Right. And I want to speak to that honesty for just a second. And I think this, Orenza, but I don't know if everybody watching is. So I wrote this book, Those Who Can't Teach. And the book is, it's 10 chapters. Every chapter is a true story. One of the chapters is my story. And one of the chapters is an example. There's an example about what you're talking about. I was interviewing a parent for the book. Every story, I went and interviewed all the parents. Sometimes I got to talk to the children. And in this one particular case, the mom and I were talking, and her son, and not the son that I was interviewing her about, but a sibling, was home. This was in the summer, and he was working on his summer school stuff. And I think because it was summer and because I was there, he didn't really want to work on this summer school homework. And so she excused herself and she went to the room where he was, and they were talking. And I heard her say, and I got to make sure that I'm getting the story right in my head, that he could have a break and he could have like whatever the time was, 20 minutes or 30-minute break. And then he would have to get back to his schoolwork. And so she told him, at whatever that time was, 20 minutes or 30 minutes, you have to stop and you have to get back to your schoolwork. And he says, well, you could set a timer on Alexa. And, he wasn't being snarky. He wasn't being a smart aleck. He wasn't talking back to her. He was being truthful. Well, you could set a timer. Then I don't have to watch the time, Mom. The timer would do it for me. Mm. And I felt like she did a great job. And she says, you're right, I could, but you also can be responsible and you can watch the time yourself. And so that's something that I wrote in the book is, so often it's just an honest statement that comes out of a child's mouth. They're not trying to be snarky. They're not trying to be disrespectful. They're just telling you facts. They're being truthful.
Right. No, definitely. Definitely. And I can tell you, my daughter obviously can't speak, but sometimes I just laugh because like, I think a lot of times she's probably like, what are you guys doing? Like sometimes like when we go to OT, and I don't go in right now because of COVID, but they would try to help her with like learning sequences, and like she can't really do more than like a one step because it's too much. Like you tell her like 3 things, she's gonna not remember any of them, right? Mm-hmm. So they're trying to teach her like sequencing, but incorporating like sensory stuff. So they'll have her do like a whatever, like a maze, like not like a maze, like a obstacle course or something. So, but then they'll have her take a puzzle piece, and then the puzzle will be at the end of the obstacle course, and then she'll have to come back and grab another piece and go on. So she'll try taking like 3 pieces at one time. She's like, why are this is like busy work? Why am I having like, you guys are idiots? Yeah. Why don't I just take all the pieces with me the first time? Like, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah. Understand
she's
the real
got it figured out.
But yeah, so she's like smart. She's like, oh, like, are you guys like? She's probably thinking in her head, you're all morons. Why is that? Because she's smart. Like I tell you, she's smart. Wouldn't it just be easier if I take all the pieces with me now? Like I don't understand.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Whatever it is that they're having her do, because she's like way ahead of everybody. Like, you know what I mean? So, but right. I got like, they're trying to teach her like, okay, I can do this first, then this, then this, right. and then shit, right. or whatever they're trying to teach her how to do. But she's like, the puzzle. Why am I taking these pieces?
Right. It's more efficient to take 3 or 4 pieces that I can carry at a time and go do it, and then come back and get the next set. But yeah.
So she's just like, I don't understand why you people are all stupid. And I think that's like what a lot of kids with autism, like especially the really smart ones, are like idiots. Like I don't understand. Like so, and I had worked with this because all the kids pretty much were on the spectrum in the family. I would work with the dad like for a while because he was on the spectrum, and he was like really smart, and he was like in this computer job. He made like 6 figures, and he did really well at work, but didn't do as well in the family because it's kind of the same thing. Like they'd all like he'd be like 4 steps ahead of everybody else, and he's just like, why aren't you guys with me? Like I don't understand. Like,
right.
And I was like, yeah. I said, well, you know what? Yeah, you're really smart, and you work in this big tech job. You make all this money, but your kids are not all the way there. Or your wife, especially the wife, I felt bad for her, but she was not on the spectrum, so she wasn't like all the way over there. And he just was like, just get with it. I don't understand why people aren't where I'm supposed to, where I'm at, kind of thing.
Right.
I'm like, but this is not your tech job. This is your family. It's different. Try to explain to him like how. Because I had his job, like things were like A, B, and C, and that was it. Right. Like at home, things were not always like that. It was
right. So, do you find with your daughter that she is really social, or is she a little bit more withdrawn? And
she is. It takes her a while to warm up to people. It does, but once she's got that relationship, she gets really attached. So, and she does better with older kids, so it's a little bit harder for her to form relationships with her, like people in her class, kids in her class. Like she's got her one-on-one that she's had since last year, and she was gone for like 3 months, and she had a really hard time. She went on maternity leave. She's back, and the first week she was back, like her teacher was like, "Oh," as he was beaming, like she was so excited, and this cat was, and I'm like, "Oh," and I won't get into this. The social worker she has this year, they were in, they were out, whatever. And in our district, they have this really weird policy where unless your child has a behavior plan, they don't have a social work goal, which makes no sense because all our kids have social issues. Yes. He goes into class and he does groups and stuff, but the kids, and she does not have a behavior plan. I mean, so she had some behaviors this second half of the semester, probably because her one-on-one was gone, and
Right.
Some other changes. But yeah, he's just like, well, she's not really interested in other kids. I'm like, well, she is. She just doesn't know how to act with them. She doesn't know what to do. She can't talk. So she does have a best friend. And the only reason why they're friends is because he's more social and decided he was going to be friends with her. So if he didn't do that, I don't think she'd be friends with him.
Yeah.
But at least like she's like, okay, this guy wants to be friends with me. I'll be friends with him. Like she didn't push me or anything. So they've been friends since preschool. When they're three, when they were three.
Oh, cute. Yeah.
And I love their preschool teacher would like send me these pictures. He'd be like showing her like you're like, here, look at this toy. And she'd just be like, okay. He'd like hold her hand. He'd be like, all right, this is what we're doing. So but he's gonna be going to the other school though, because based on where we live, we're gonna stay at the school in there. And so I'm kind of upset about that. But I mean, I'm more upset for him because he's a runner and they don't really have a fence around their playground.
Right.
Hopefully they're gonna figure that out because they need to. Because I know of him and one other kid who's a runner and they need a fence. So anyway, that's going over to the other school. But yeah, and then she's really attached to Kathy, and the social worker's like, well, she doesn't hug Kathy, and I'm like, yeah, she doesn't hug me either. If I say give mommy a hug, she just comes over and lets me hug her. It's just like that doesn't mean she's not attached to Kathy. Like I don't understand where you're getting that from. I know some kids who are on the other end of the spectrum where they hug everybody, and that's probably not a good idea either. So
I
just So
I mean, just something that I don't remember which guest it was anymore, but somebody also in the book says a similar comment or the exact same comment about her child in the book, that we have to learn the student, so we're not learning this disability. We're not learning, how to teach reading or math, but we need to learn the student. That I feel like that is so important because, what's the saying? If you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. If you know one redhead, you know one redhead. I mean, we're not all hot tempered. We're not.
Right. I mean, yeah, you're right. Exactly. Like I'm Italian, and like I'm not your stereotypical Italian. I worked at this group practice once, and the guy that owned the place was like, "Oh, I joke around." I'm like, I've hired the most laid back Italian person you've ever met because I don't have a hot temper like Italian people do, and I'm like, I'm like, whatever. You know what I mean? I'm like, all right, well, it's just weird. So and I'm like, my family's not, like whatever.
Yeah. So getting to know our students, getting to know our neighbors, our coworkers, whomever it is that is different than us in whatever way, I mean, it can, no matter what the difference is, nobody, there's a group that, is some reason that a stereotype was made, but most of the time the people that I've met have not, when I've gotten to know that individual, they don't fit that stereotype. It's kind of like, when you say, well, they said this or they do this, well, who's they? Who really are?
The social workers are like, this population. And I'm like, what? Like that's how he he starts up. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, who hired you? Like he's new this year. And I'm like, oh, I don't like you. Like it's just and
that's a shame. And I'm hoping that, this show and my book and, what we do as master IEP coaches, trying to help people change their perspective, trying to broaden that perspective. I mean, my story very much is I was very narrow focused. When I was 9 years old, I wanted to be a gen ed teacher. Until I was in my early 20s, I wanted to be a gen ed teacher. But suddenly, my eyes were opened and I had lots of experiences. And it was those experiences that changed my mind and my perspective. And I don't think if I'd not had those experiences that I would have changed my mind. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do for other people in the world is shorten the amount of time to change perspectives, because we don't all have 20 years. Well, it wasn't exactly 20, but 15 or whatever it was, or even if we do, we waste, I wasted a lot of time, in that 15 years before deciding, no, special education is where I want to go. And now, 41 years from the time I decided to be a teacher until today, I'm like, we need to do better. We need to, make the world a better place for everybody by opening our eyes and allowing ourselves to have these different experiences. And so my hope for this show, my hope for the guest is always that the guest gets to tell their story the way that they want their story told. And my hope for the audience is that horizons are broadened and perspectives are changed and hearts are changed, and that they use whatever they've gotten from this show and they go forward and they treat people better, and they give every individual they meet an opportunity to be that individual and not whatever you see on the outside or whatever you've heard about that person.
I was just thinking about, like, general ed teachers usually don't get a whole lot of like classes or anything with special kids. Because I was just thinking when I was working as a therapist, and my mom came in with her 5th grader. He was in general ed, but he had autism, and he, I guess, was really upset with his teacher and said he was going to blow up the school. He's a 5th grader. but she came.
You can't ignore that stuff in today's world, unfortunately.
He was like 11, and
right.
He was just really frustrated and upset, and so I had to write a note saying he was not going to blow up the school, so he could get back to school. And then I called and tried to talk to the teacher, and she didn't want to hear anything about his anxiety, about any, the trouble he was having in class. She's just like, got no tolerance, whatever. And I just felt so bad being in her class because.
And as much education as I received getting a special education degree, I started getting an elementary degree, and I'm actually dually certified. And once I left teaching and I started thinking back on my experiences in my university days, I realized how little training gen ed teachers actually receive in special education. And it's maybe 2 classes. And in those 2 classes, and I've spoken to several gen ed teachers who are currently teaching, who have been out for a while, and those who have, come out recently, and from all different colleges across the country. And it's pretty similar all across the country that, you get a class called something like exceptionalities or special education 101. It's a very basic level, and they just kind of gloss over everything that special education is, because they don't have enough time to really dig deep into anything. Mm-hmm. And so, and that's one class. And then maybe they'll take another class, that might go into deeper concepts in something. But I realized that, I was really hard on some of my gen ed peers because I expected them to know more than they were taught, honestly. And so I've since apologized, but at the same time, I'm like, but we need to do better. We're expecting our kids to be included in as much of a way as possible. And for some kids, that's very minimal. And for other kids, that's very maximum. But we're not necessarily teaching the teachers how to help those kids when they're in their classrooms. We just, okay, this is the law, here, do it.
Right. Right. And that's what I'm not saying like that should be taken seriously, but like, I'm like, I obviously interviewed him, talked to his mom. He was just very frustrated, and he had a whole lot of anxiety, like for the rest of the year, so obviously I said, it's very serious when you say you're going to blow up school, and you can't say that no matter how frustrated you are. And obviously I work with him starting from then on, but she just didn't want to even, because he had a lot, they kept pulling him out for stuff, like pull out for speech, pull out for whatever, and so when he would come back, they'd be in the middle of something, and he'd be so upset because he wouldn't know where they were and what they were doing. And so that would cause, and she would just expect him to just follow along, and I'm like, how is that even, like, you know what I mean? So that was causing him anxiety and frustration, because she wasn't even giving him. And she's just like, I have 0 tolerance. I'm like, okay. Like, you know what I mean? I was just like,
yeah. And we can't be like that. I mean, it's unfortunate where our society is, that kids, and I mean, we say, we as a society, not we in my house, but, we'll say things kind of off the cuff that we don't mean frequently, like, or, in video games about, this demise or that demise, or I'm going to, I'm going to kill you, or, whatever. And we don't mean it in its real sense of the word.
Right.
But because we've had the situations that we've had, we can't ignore that sort of statement anymore. So we do have to make sure that everybody understands, but yeah, to have a zero tolerance, because people, I don't know, rightfully so, maybe not, are fearful now that, anytime somebody says that, they're going to follow through on it.
Right. No,
So,
and I understand. And that's why I
right.
put, he was 11. He was a good
Right.
We had no
Right.
plan.
Yeah.
So, but then, he came back to school, and even then I'd be like, if he's got to go to speech or something, can we figure out something so he's not so anxious about it, and, kind of get to the root why he said that, and she wasn't even willing to do anything.
Yeah.
So.
And yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I really do think it comes down to fear because, like I said, the teachers get so little training and they don't know how to deal with something. And so, like in a lot of situations, we don't understand it, so we don't deal with it.
Right. Yeah.
And that's very unfortunate, especially when we're dealing with kids. Well, Orenza, we just have a couple minutes more. So I just want to give you that opportunity to make sure that, you say what you want to say, and you've had your opportunity to say everything you wanted to say.
I just, just feel like, you feel something's wrong as a parent, say something. And, as a parent, if you're, if your child has an IEP or a 504, you are equal member of that team. And what is the most important part of that is to do your parent input statement.
Yeah.
Or you get that in there. That is the most important thing that you could do for your child IEP.
Yeah. And so if somebody wanted to follow you, or get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Well, I am on Facebook at the moment at Orenza Jaske. That's my my Facebook, and my email is ojaske@gmail.com.
Okay, perfect. Well, again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking with you this afternoon. I appreciate your time and sharing your personal insights into things in your own personal life, but as well as some of the things that you have dealt with in your business life. And for me, if you need any assistance from me, you can find me on all kinds of places. I feel like I'm everywhere. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Instagram. I have a website. You can just find me anywhere. If you want a free IEP checklist, I will put the link in the chat box here at the end of this so that you can go directly to that link rather than me tell you what it is and you try to write it down. So thank you all very much for watching. We so appreciate you, and I will see you next week.
Thanks for having me.